The crystal vase shattered against the marble wall, missing Maria's head by inches. Maxwell Thornton, III, the most feared billionaire in New York, stood trembling with rage, his face purple as he screamed obscenities that would make a sailor blush. But what he didn't know, what nobody knew, was that the 4 identical maids cleaning his penthouse weren't just any employees. They were about to teach him a lesson that would break him completely, and save him in ways he never imagined. Welcome to Stories by Jason. If you're settled in and ready for a good story, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I've got another exciting story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Thank you so much for the love and support. You're truly appreciated, and I'm so grateful to have you here with me. The elevator doors opened onto the 47th floor with a whisper of expensive machinery, revealing a corridor that smelled of money, aged leather, fresh orchids, and the subtle scent of wood polish on furniture worth more than most people's homes. Reyes stepped out first, her 3 identical sisters following in perfect synchronization, their matching gray uniforms crisp and professional despite the August humidity they'd left behind on the streets of Manhattan. "Remember," Maria whispered, her hand hovering over the ornate doorbell of penthouse 4701, "we stay together, no matter what." Sophia squeezed her shoulder, "Always." Isabella and Gabriella nodded, their faces mirrors of determination. At 28 years old, the Maid Quadruplets had cleaned penthouses before, had dealt with demanding clients, had navigated the invisible hierarchies of New York's ultra-wealthy. But Maxwell Thornton, III, was different. The employment agency had been almost apologetic when offering them the position. "He's difficult," the recruiter had said, a masterpiece of understatement. 17 maids in 3 months, most don't last a week. The door swung open before Maria could ring, revealing a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face. Her eyes scanned the 4 identical women with something between relief and pity. "You must be the Reyes girls," she said, her British accent crisp. "I'm Mrs. Patterson, the house manager. Come in quickly before he patterson, where the hell is my coffee?" The roar came from somewhere deep in the penthouse, a sound of such raw fury that Isabella actually flinched. Mrs. Patterson's expression didn't change, but her knuckles whitened on the doorframe. "Before he starts," she finished quietly, "follow me, stay silent, don't make eye contact, and whatever you do, don't try to help him." The penthouse stretched before them like a museum of wealth and rage. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Central Park in golden morning light, but the beauty was marred by chaos. A leather chair lay on its side, stuffing bleeding from a gash in the cushion. Abstract paintings hung crookedly on walls that bore scuff marks and dents. Fresh flowers wilted in vases that hadn't been changed, their petals scattered across marble floors worth 6 figures. And everywhere, was the evidence of violence against objects. A laptop with a cracked screen abandoned on a coffee table. Books scattered like casualties across an antique rug. A grandfather clock stopped at 3:47, its face spiderwebbed with cracks. "He throws things," Mrs. Patterson said unnecessarily, leading them through a dining room where one chair sat isolated from the others, its mahogany frame splintered. "Never at people, at least not directly, but he has excellent aim when he wants to scare you." Gabriella's eyes tracked everything, cataloging the damage with the analytical precision that had always made her the quadruplet strategist. This wasn't random destruction. Each broken item seemed chosen for maximum impact, expensive enough to matter, personal enough to hurt. They passed a gallery wall of family photographs, and Sophia's breath caught. In the earliest images, Maxwell Thornton beamed, a handsome man in his 40s with laugh lines and genuine warmth in his eyes, his arm wrapped around a stunning woman with kind eyes and dark hair. 2 teenage children flanked them, grinning with the unself-conscious joy of people who believed they were invincible. But the photographs changed. The warmth drained away image by image, year by year. The woman disappeared entirely after a certain point. The children's smiles grew more forced, then vanished. And Maxwell transformed from a man into something harder, angrier, until in the most recent photo he stood alone, his eyes empty despite the camera's flash. "That was before," Mrs. Patterson said, noticing Sophia's gaze. "Before the accident, before patterson. They found him in what must have been a study, though it looked more like a war room. Maxwell Thornton, III, sat behind a massive desk of dark wood, papers scattered around him like snow after a storm. He was 52, the files had said, but he looked older, lines carved deep around his mouth, silver threading through dark hair left uncombed, expensive clothes rumpled as if he'd slept in them. His eyes, though, His eyes were what made Maria's heart clench despite her training, despite her professional distance. They burned with an anger that seemed to consume him from the inside out, but underneath she saw something that looked like drowning. "Your coffee, sir," Mrs. Patterson said, setting a porcelain cup on the desk with hands that didn't shake despite the tension radiating from the man before them. Maxwell didn't look at the coffee. He looked at the quadruplets, his gaze sweeping over their identical faces with something that might have been confusion, then irritation. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice like gravel. "Some kind of circus act, 4 of them, Patterson. What, you think sheer numbers will keep them here when all the others ran?" "They came highly recommended, sir. The Reyes sisters have excellent references." "I don't give a damn about references." Maxwell surged to his feet, and Maria saw her sisters tense. He was tall, broad-shouldered despite the slight stoop of exhaustion, and when he moved, objects seemed to rearrange themselves to give him space. "I need people who can work, not identical dolls who will gossip about me to page 6 while they're supposed to be cleaning my goddamn house." He grabbed the coffee cup, and for one terrible moment Maria thought he'd throw it. His hand trembled, his jaw worked, and the rage rolled off him in waves. But then something shifted. His eyes met Maria's, really met them, and she didn't look away. She'd learned years ago, cleaning houses for the wealthy, that most people didn't really see their staff. They looked through you, around you, but never at you. Maxwell Thornton was looking at her now, and she refused to flinch. "We're not dolls," Maria said quietly. "We're professionals, and we don't run." The silence stretched like a rubber band pulled to breaking. Mrs. Patterson had gone pale. Isabella's hand found Gabriella's, their fingers interlocking in the secret language of their childhood. Sophia held her breath. Maxwell set the coffee cup down with exaggerated care. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously soft. "You don't run," he repeated. "That's what they all say. First day they're all brave, all professional. By day 3 they're crying in the bathroom. By day 5 they're gone." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. "So here's how this works. You clean, you stay out of my way. You don't touch anything in this room, don't reorganize my papers, don't try to help me with anything except basic housekeeping. You see me losing my temper, you leave the room. You hear me shouting, you pretend you're deaf. And maybe, you'll last longer than the last 17 pathetic excuses for maids who thought they could handle me." "Understood," Maria said. Then, because something in his performance rang false, the anger too practiced, the cruelty too deliberate, she added, "We'll start with the living room. Those flowers need changing, and the carpet needs attention." "I don't give a," Maxwell started, but Maria was already turning away, her sisters following. They left him mid-sentence, mid-rage, and for just a second Maria saw his reflection in the window glass. He looked confused, lost, and beneath the fury, desperately, achingly alone. Mrs. Patterson caught up with them in the hallway, her professional mask cracking just enough to show shock. No one talks back to him. No one. "Maybe that's the problem," Sophia said softly. They spent the next 4 hours working in careful coordination, the silent communication of quadruplets who'd shared a womb and a lifetime. Maria took the living room, removing dead flowers and finding vases that hadn't been shattered yet. Isabella tackled the dining room, righting furniture and polishing surfaces until the wood gleamed. Gabriella worked through the kitchen, organizing chaos into order with methodical precision. And Sophia photographed everything with her phone, documenting the damage in a way that would have looked like simple before and after shots, but was actually something more. They met in the kitchen at noon, after Maxwell had stormed through twice more. Once to throw a coffee mug at the wall, it missed Maria by 3 feet, which she suspected was intentional. And once to stand in the doorway of the living room, staring at the fresh flowers Maria had arranged with such intensity she thought he might actually speak to her. He didn't. He just turned and left, his shoulders tight with something that looked like pain. "Did you see it?" Gabriella asked, pulling up security footage on her tablet. She'd hacked the penthouse's internal cameras within an hour, a skill that had proven invaluable in their previous work. On the screen, Maxwell Thornton sat alone in his study, head in his hands. When he thought no one was watching, the rage drained away, leaving behind something raw and broken. He picked up a framed photograph from his desk drawer, the same woman from the gallery wall, younger, laughing, and his whole body shook with silent sobs. "He's performing," Maria said, understanding clicking into place. "The anger, it's real, but it's armor." "Look at this," Sophia said, pulling up her own phone. She'd been researching during lunch, her background in investigative journalism making her the quadruplets information specialist. Maxwell Thornton, took over Thornton Industries at 25 when his father died. built it into a tech empire worth $12 billion, married Elizabeth Chen, a cardiac surgeon, at 30. Two children, Natalie, now 24, and Thomas, 22. She swiped to a news article, her voice dropping. 4 years ago, Elizabeth died in a car accident. She was driving home from a charity event. Maxwell was supposed to go with her, but he stayed late at the office for a board meeting. Another swipe. 6 months later, his children moved out. They haven't been photographed together since. And the rage started then, Isabella asked. According to his previous staff, the ones who lasted long enough to talk, it was gradual, first just grief, then anger at himself, then anger at everyone. Sophia's eyes were dark with sympathy. He fired his therapist after 3 sessions, stopped attending family events. The board of directors has been trying to force him into retirement for 2 years, but he owns 60% of the company. They can't touch him. Maria looked back at the security feed, watching Maxwell sit alone in a penthouse that had become his prison. So he pushes everyone away, makes himself so difficult that no one can get close enough to see him falling apart. But why, Gabriella wondered. What's he protecting? What's he hiding from? The answer came at 3:47 p.m. exactly, the time frozen on the broken grandfather clock. Maria was dusting the mantel in the living room when she heard it, a chime, soft and persistent, from somewhere in the penthouse. Maxwell's roar of anguish followed immediately, so full of pain that it stopped her heart. She ran, professionalism forgotten, following the sound to Maxwell's bedroom, a space Mrs. Patterson had told them never to enter. The door hung open. Inside, Maxwell stood frozen before a wall of screens, each one showing security footage from different angles of the same stretch of highway. And on every screen at exactly 3:47 p.m. 4 years ago, a car, a silver Mercedes, spun out of control in the rain, struck the barrier and crumpled like paper against a concrete pillar. "Sir," Maria started, but Maxwell rounded on her with such fury that she actually stepped back. "Get out," he screamed, and this time the rage was real, unperformed, raw as an open wound. "I told you never to come in here. I told you." But then his eyes locked on the clock she could see reflected in his mirror. 3:47. The exact time his wife had died. The exact time he'd been in a board meeting, arguing about quarterly projections while Elizabeth Chen fought for her last breaths. "Every day," he whispered, the fight draining out of him as suddenly as it had risen. He sank onto his bed, staring at the screens with eyes that had seen this footage 1,000 times and would see it 1,000 more. "Every day I watch it, because I should have been there. I should have been driving. I should have." He broke off, his hands covering his face, and Maria understood. This wasn't about anger. This was about guilt so crushing that it had become its own kind of prison. Maxwell Thornton didn't want people to help him. He wanted to punish himself, and everyone who tried to save him became an obstacle to his self-destruction. Maria should have left, should have backed away, given him privacy, maintained professional distance. Instead, she sat down beside him on the bed, a breach of every protocol she'd ever learned. "You can't save her by watching," she said quietly, "and you can't punish yourself enough to bring her back." Maxwell's head snapped up, fury blazing again. "What the hell do you know about?" "My mother died when we were 16, Maria interrupted, gesturing to encompass her absent sisters. "Breast cancer. We were identical, so we all got tested. All 4 of us, carriers of the same genetic mutation. Watching her die, knowing we might follow, that we'd inherited her death sentence along with her eyes and her smile." She met his gaze steadily. "I was so angry, Mr. Thornton. Angry at genetics, at God, at my mother for dying and leaving us with that knowledge. I pushed everyone away because how could they understand? How could anyone who wasn't living under that shadow possibly know what it felt like?" "But you had your sisters," Maxwell said bitterly. "I have no one." "You have no one because you won't let anyone in," Maria replied. "And I understand why. Because if they get close, they might see that under all this rage, you're terrified. Terrified that you're as worthless as you tell yourself you are. Terrified that if you stop punishing yourself for 1 second, you might have to admit that Elizabeth's death wasn't your fault." The slap of her words hit harder than any physical blow. Maxwell stood abruptly, his hands shaking. "You don't know anything about my wife, about what I—" "No," Maria agreed, standing too. "But I know that 17 maids didn't run because you were angry. They ran because your pain was so big it filled every room and they didn't know how to breathe around it." She took a breath. "My sisters and I, we know how to breathe underwater, Mr. Thornton, and we're not leaving until you learn too." For the first time since they'd arrived, Maxwell Thornton looked at her, really looked, seeing not a maid or an employee but a person who just offered him something he'd forgotten existed. understanding without judgment. Then his walls slammed back up and he pointed to the door. Out now. Maria went, but as she closed the door behind her, she heard the quiet sound of Maxwell Thornton beginning, finally, to cry. Her sisters met her in the hallway, having abandoned their posts the moment they'd heard the shouting. They didn't ask what happened. They didn't need to. The look on Maria's face told them everything. He's drowning, Maria said simply, and someone's been holding his head underwater. Then we find out who, Gabriella replied, her analyst's mind already working, and we make them stop. That night, after Maxwell had locked himself in his study with a bottle of scotch and instructions not to be disturbed, the Reyes Quadruplets gathered in the staff quarters Mrs. Patterson had assigned them. They sat in a circle on the floor, just like they had as children when tackling problems too big for one person alone, and began to plan. Because they'd seen something in that penthouse, something beyond the obvious grief and self-destruction. They'd seen evidence of a system, carefully maintained, that kept Maxwell Thornton isolated and suffering. The broken clock that no one fixed. The security footage that played on an endless loop. The way Mrs. Patterson navigated his rage with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned to work around it rather than address it. Someone wanted Maxwell Thornton exactly as he was, broken, alone, and too consumed by guilt to see what was happening around him. And the Reyes Quadruplets were going to find out why. The second day began at 6:47 a.m. when Isabella discovered the pills. She'd been assigned to clean Maxwell's bathroom, a marble sanctuary that smelled of expensive cologne and neglect, when she found them. 37 prescription bottles lined up in the medicine cabinet with military precision. Antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, sleeping pills, mood stabilizers, enough psychiatric medication to treat a small clinic, all prescribed by different doctors, none of the bottles more than half empty despite some dating back 3 years. He's not taking them, Isabella reported to her sisters over their morning coffee in the kitchen. Mrs. Patterson had the day off, leaving them alone in the penthouse except for Maxwell, who hadn't emerged from his bedroom. Or he's taking them irregularly. Either way, someone's prescribing these without coordinating care, which is dangerous, Sophia finished, and possibly illegal, depending on whether the doctors know about each other. Maria pulled up the prescription labels on her phone, photographing each one. Different doctors, different practices, all over Manhattan and Connecticut. Dr. Sarah Chen, Dr. Michael Thornton, Dr. Patricia Winters, Dr. James Morrison. The list went on. Wait, Gabriella said, her finger stopping on one name. Dr. Sarah Chen, isn't that his wife's sister? Sophia confirmed, already pulling up her tablet. Elizabeth Chen had one sibling, Sarah Chen, now 48, cardiac surgeon at Mount Sinai. Her fingers flew across the screen. And Dr. Michael Thornton is Maxwell's younger brother, orthopedic surgeon in Connecticut. The pieces began to click together like a puzzle built from prescriptions and family connections. They're all related to him, Maria said slowly. Family members with medical licenses, prescribing psychiatric medication without a coordinated treatment plan. But why, Isabella wondered, if they're trying to help? Are they? Gabriella's voice was sharp. She pulled up Thornton Industries stock history, her eyes tracking the graph with growing suspicion. Look at this. 4 years ago, stock price was at $847 per share. Then Elizabeth dies, Maxwell starts his isolation, and the stock drops. $645, $512, $438. The board announces they're concerned about leadership stability. Stock drops more. She swiped to a different screen. But 3 years ago, it stabilizes, hovers around $400 per share. And guess who's been buying massive amounts of stock during these drops? The name on the screen made Sophia's breath catch. Thornton Family Trust, managed by Thomas Thornton Jr., Maxwell's younger brother. Let me guess, Maria said, her journalist's instincts pinging. If Maxwell becomes incapacitated or unfit to run the company, control of his 60% stake passes to the family trust, Gabriella confirmed. Which means his brother, his sister-in-law, his children, they all benefit from him being exactly as he is right now. Too unstable to manage the company effectively, but not unstable enough to be declared legally incompetent. The sound of a door opening made them fall silent. Maxwell shuffled into the kitchen, looking like he'd aged a decade overnight. His eyes were bloodshot, his expensive pajamas rumpled, and his hair stuck up at odd angles. He froze when he saw them, clearly not expecting staff to be there. Coffee? Maria asked, keeping her voice neutral as she poured a cup before he could answer. Maxwell grunted, accepting the cup and turning to leave. But Isabella, emboldened by their discovery, spoke up. Mr. Thornton, when was the last time you saw your children? The question hung in the air like smoke. Maxwell turned slowly, his expression dangerous. What? Your children, Isabella repeated, her nurse's training making her voice gentle but firm. Natalie and Thomas. I noticed there are no recent photos of them in the penthouse, just older ones from before. Before their mother died and they realized what a failure their father was. Maxwell's laugh was bitter. Is that what you want to hear? That they hate me? That I don't blame them? I want to hear when you last spoke to them, Isabella said. Maxwell stared at his coffee and for a moment Maria thought he wouldn't answer. Then so quietly they almost missed it. 23 months. Thomas sent a text on my birthday last year. Happy birthday, Dad. 3 words. Natalie didn't even do that. And you didn't reach out? Sophia asked. Why would I? Maxwell's voice rose, the familiar anger returning. So they can see what I've become. So I can disappoint them more than I already have. I couldn't save their mother. I can't even save myself. What the hell do I have to offer them except? He stopped abruptly, as if realizing he'd said too much. His hand trembled around the coffee cup, and he set it down with exaggerated care. This is none of your business, he said, but the fire had gone out of it. Clean the house, that's what you're here for. He left, but not before Maria saw the way his shoulders shook, the way he leaned against the wall in the hallway for just a moment before straightening and walking away. He doesn't know, Maria said quietly. He has no idea what's happening. Then we show him, Gabriella replied, but carefully, if we're right about his family. They won't want him getting better, Sophia finished, because a healthy Maxwell Thornton takes back control of his company and his life. The rest of the morning they worked with purpose beyond cleaning. Maria engaged Maxwell in conversation every time she encountered him, brief exchanges that seemed innocuous but were carefully designed to gather information. When had the security footage started playing daily? 3 years ago at his brother's suggestion, to help him process his grief. Who managed his medications. Dr. Chen sent prescriptions monthly. He was supposed to take them but often forgot. When had he last attended a board meeting? 18 months ago, before his brother convinced him he was too unstable to make major business decisions. Sophia hacked into Maxwell's email. A shockingly easy task given his password was Elizabeth0347, her name and the time she died, and found a pattern that made her blood run cold. Monthly emails from his brother Thomas, his sister-in-law Sarah, even his own children, all reinforcing the same message. He was sick, he needed help, he should rest and let the family handle things. Each email carefully crafted to sound concerned while systematically isolating him further. But it was Gabriella who found the smoking gun. Look at this, she said, gathering her sisters in the empty library while Maxwell raged in his study about a business call that had gone badly. She'd been analyzing Thornton Industries' financial records, cross-referencing them with the family trust's investments. On her screen, a series of shell companies, all owned by the Thornton Family Trust, all contracted with Thornton Industries for services at substantially inflated rates. Consulting fees, management services, administrative costs, millions of dollars flowing from the company Maxwell owned into accounts controlled by his family. They're bleeding the company dry, Gabriella said, her voice tight with anger. Small enough amounts that it doesn't trigger audits, spread across enough subsidiaries that it looks legitimate, but it adds up to almost $40 million over 3 years, Sophia finished, scrolling through the numbers. And if Maxwell ever recovered enough to take control again, he'd discover it immediately, Maria completed the thought. So they keep him sick, keep him isolated, keep him so consumed by guilt and rage that he can't function well enough to ask questions. They sat in silence, the weight of the conspiracy settling over them like a shroud. This wasn't just about a grieving man and an enabler family. This was deliberate, calculated financial abuse, hidden behind the facade of concern. We need proof he can't ignore, Isabella said. Something that breaks through the guilt and the anger. We need his children, Maria replied. Whatever the family's done, Natalie and Thomas are victims too. They lost their mother, and then someone convinced them to lose their father too. Sophia was already typing, her fingers flying across her keyboard. Natalie Thornton, 24, works as a pediatric resident at Columbia Presbyterian, lives in Washington Heights, more typing. Thomas Thornton, Jr., 22, junior at Columbia Law School, also in Washington Heights. They're 15 minutes away, Maria said, understanding dawning. He thinks they hate him and don't want to see him, but they're 15 minutes away. And based on their social media, Sophia added, pulling up Instagram profiles. They're both in therapy, both posting about grief and family trauma, both clearly struggling with their mother's death and their father's isolation. On the screen, Natalie's most recent post showed her in scrubs, exhausted, with a caption that made Maria's heart clench. 4 years today. Mom, I hope I'm making you proud. I hope Dad finds peace someday. I hope I find the courage to help him, even though Uncle Tom says I shouldn't interfere with his healing process. Uncle Tom, Gabriella said darkly, Thomas Thornton Jr., who's been managing the family trust and telling everyone to stay away from Maxwell. A crash from the study made them jump. They found Maxwell standing amid shattered glass, another coffee cup, another wall, another expression of rage that barely masked the pain beneath. Mr. Thornton, Maria said carefully, stepping over the broken ceramic, can I ask you something? No, he said flatly, clean this up and leave me alone. When Elizabeth died, Maria continued as if he hadn't spoken, did you push your children away or did they leave on their own? The question hit like a physical blow. Maxwell's face went white then red. Get out. Because I found something interesting, Maria pressed, pulling out her phone. Social media posts from Natalie. Want to hear what your daughter wrote this morning? I said get out, Maxwell roared, but Maria was already reading. Missing Mom extra hard today. Wish I could talk to Dad, but Uncle Tom says it would just upset him, make him worse. Why does grief have to mean being alone? She looked up, meeting Maxwell's eyes. Does that sound like a daughter who hates you, or a daughter who's been told to stay away? The silence was absolute. Maxwell stared at her at the phone, processing. Tom told her, my brother told her to stay away. Someone did, Maria said carefully. Someone's been telling a lot of people a lot of things about what's best for you. She took a breath, knowing she was about to cross a line that might get them all fired or worse. But the image of Natalie in her scrubs, of Thomas studying law while grieving his mother alone, of Maxwell trapped in his penthouse prison, made the choice easy. Mr. Thornton, when was the last time you looked at your company's financial records? Really looked at them, not just the summaries your brother sends. Maxwell's eyes narrowed. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm asking a question. You're a maid, Maxwell said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Why would you, how would you even? Because you're not crazy, Maria said firmly. You're grieving, you're isolated. You're drowning in guilt that isn't entirely yours to carry. But you're not crazy and you're not incompetent, and someone needs to tell you that the system around you, the family, the doctors, the prescriptions, the security footage playing on loop, it's not helping you heal. It's keeping you sick. That's insane, Maxwell said, but his hands were shaking. My family wouldn't, they're concerned about me. They care. Then why haven't they visited in 3 years? Sophia asked quietly, stepping into the room. Why do your children live 15 minutes away and never call? Why are you taking medications prescribed by 7 different doctors who never consulted with each other? Why, Gabriella added, her tablet held out for him to see, is the Thornton Family Trust billing your company for $40 million in services that don't seem to exist? Maxwell took the tablet with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the numbers. Maria watched his face transform, confusion giving way to comprehension, comprehension to shock, shock to a fury that was different from anything she'd seen before. This wasn't the practiced rage of a man punishing himself. This was the cold anger of a man who just realized he'd been betrayed. No, he whispered. No, Tom wouldn't. We're brothers. Sarah was Elizabeth's sister. They wouldn't. Look at the dates, Gabriella said gently. It started 6 months after Elizabeth died, right when you were at your lowest, right when you were too consumed by grief to pay attention to business details. Maxwell's knees buckled and he sank into his desk chair, the tablet clutched in his hands. They're stealing from me. My own family is, he looked up and the betrayal in his eyes was worse than any anger. And my children, Natalie and Thomas, do they know? Are they part of this? We don't think so, Maria said quickly. Based on their social media, their posts, the way they talk about you, Mr. Thornton, I think they miss you. I think they want to see you. And I think someone's been very carefully making sure that doesn't happen. Maxwell's breathing was ragged, his face cycling through emotions too fast to track. Finally, he looked at the 4 identical faces surrounding him, these maids who'd somehow uncovered in 2 days what he'd been too broken to see in 3 years. Why, he asked simply. Why do you care? You could just do your job and leave like everyone else. Maria exchanged glances with her sisters, a lifetime of communication passing between them in a second. Then she pulled out her phone and showed him a photograph. 4 young girls, maybe 16, standing beside a hospital bed where a gaunt woman smiled bravely at the camera. That's our mother, Maria said. 3 months before she died. After she was gone, we were so angry, so convinced that we were alone in our grief and our fear about our own genetic future. She looked at her sisters, at the bonds that had been tested and strengthened by that shared trauma. Someone, a grief counselor at the hospital, told us something we didn't want to hear. She said that isolation is a choice, not a sentence, that grief doesn't have to mean being alone. It took us years to understand what she meant. "We're not leaving you alone in this," Sophia said firmly, "not when we can see what's happening. But we need your permission," Isabella added, "to help, to investigate, to contact your children if necessary." "We can prove what your family's been doing," Gabriella said, "but only if you're willing to face it, to fight back, to be angry at the right people instead of at yourself." Maxwell sat in silence, the tablet still glowing in his hands with evidence of his family's betrayal. Outside the windows, Manhattan glittered in the afternoon sun, indifferent to the drama playing out 47 floors above the street. The clock on his wall, not the broken grandfather clock but a modern piece he kept in his study, ticked past 3:47, the cursed time, and kept going. "If I do this," Maxwell said finally, his voice hoarse, "if I look at this clearly, if I accept what you're showing me, I have to accept other things too. That I've been wrong. That I've wasted 3 years. His voice cracked, that I've lost 3 years with my children because I was too destroyed to see that someone was destroying me on purpose." "Yes," Maria said, because there was no kind way to say it. "You have to accept all of that." Maxwell closed his eyes. When he opened them again, Maria saw something new there. Determination struggling to surface through years of learned helplessness. "Show me everything," he said, "and then we're going to make this right." The Reyes quadruplets shared a look of grim satisfaction. They'd broken through the first wall. But the hardest part, the intervention that would either save Maxwell Thornton or break him completely, was still to come. And they had less than 24 hours to prepare, because Maxwell's family had just sent an email scheduling an urgent meeting for tomorrow morning to discuss concerns about Maxwell's deteriorating mental health and the need for more aggressive intervention. The trap was closing, but this time the Thornton family would find that their victim had learned to fight back. The morning of the meeting dawned gray and threatening, storm clouds gathering over Manhattan like a physical manifestation of the confrontation to come. Maxwell Thornton hadn't slept, Maria knew, because she'd monitored the security cameras and watched him pace his study until 4 a.m., surrounded by financial documents, prescription bottles, and printed emails that painted a devastating picture of systematic betrayal. At 6:30 a.m. he emerged looking like a different man. Not better exactly, but sharper. Focused. He'd showered, shaved, dressed in a suit that actually fit his frame instead of hanging loose on shoulders bowed by grief. His eyes were still haunted, but now they burned with purpose instead of just pain. "They'll be here at 9, he said without preamble when he found the quadruplets in the kitchen. "My brother Tom, my sister-in-law Sarah, and their lawyer Marcus Webb. They're bringing commitment papers." He said it flatly, as if discussing the weather. "Dr. Chen and Dr. Thornton have both signed affidavits stating I'm a danger to myself and others, and that I need immediate psychiatric hospitalization." "Based on what evidence?" Isabella demanded, her medical background making her understand exactly how serious this was. Maxwell's smile was bitter. "Based on the medications I'm supposedly not taking, the violent episodes witnessed by staff who have all conveniently quit, and the fact that I haven't attended a board meeting in 18 months. He poured coffee with hands that only trembled slightly. "They're going to try to have me committed. And once I'm in a psychiatric facility, even for 72 hours, they can petition the board to declare me unfit. My 60% becomes their 60%, and they can vote themselves whatever compensation they want." "That's not going to happen," Maria said firmly. "How do you plan to stop it?" Maxwell asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice. "They have doctors, lawyers, evidence manufactured, but still, what do 4 housekeepers have?" "The truth," Sophia said, "and a plan." She pulled out her tablet where she'd been working all night, "but it requires you to trust us, completely." What she showed him made Maxwell's eyes widen, then narrow with understanding. "That's insane." "You have a better idea," Gabriella challenged. Maxwell looked at each of them in turn. These 4 identical women who'd walked into his life 48 hours ago, and somehow seen through the walls he'd spent 3 years building. Then he laughed, actually laughed, a sound so rusty from disuse that it sounded almost foreign coming from his throat. "My wife used to say that the best defense against a liar is an unexpected truth," he said quietly. "I think she'd like this plan." At 8:45 a.m., Mrs. Patterson arrived to prepare for the meeting, her face carefully neutral in a way that told Maria everything she needed to know about who the house manager really worked for. The quadruplets made themselves scarce, but not before Maria pressed a small wireless earbud into Maxwell's hand. "We'll be listening," she whispered. "Trust the plan." Maxwell nodded, pocketed the earbud, and went to wait in his study. Thomas Thornton, Jr. arrived at precisely 9:00 a.m., flanked by Sarah Chen and Marcus Webb. From their hiding spot in the library, chosen because it shared a wall with the study and the security cameras gave them perfect audio, the quadruplets watched via Gabriella's hacked feed. Tom looked like Maxwell might have looked if grief hadn't aged him prematurely. Mid-40s, successful, with the kind of easy confidence that came from never having lost anything that mattered. Sarah Chen was elegantly dressed in what Sophia immediately pegged as Chanel, her resemblance to her dead sister, Elizabeth, striking enough to make watching her painful. And Marcus Webb was exactly what a corporate lawyer should be. Expensive suit, expensive watch, expensive smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Maxwell," Tom said, and the false concern in his voice made Maria's hands clench. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us." "Did I have a choice?" Maxwell asked mildly, and Maria heard the barely contained rage underneath the civility. "Of course you did," Sarah interjected, her voice soft and sympathetic in a way that felt practiced. "We're family, Maxwell. We're here because we care about you." "Then let's talk about how much you care," Maxwell said, and pulled out the financial documents Gabriella had compiled. "Starting with the $40 million the Thornton Family Trust has siphoned from my company over the past 3 years." The silence was beautiful. Tom's face went pale, then red. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth in a gesture that might have been shock or might have been an attempt to hide her expression. Only Marcus Webb kept his composure, though his eyes sharpened with professional interest. "Maxwell," Tom said carefully, "I don't know what you think you found, but—" "I found theft," Maxwell interrupted, his voice cold. "Systematic, calculated financial theft, hidden behind shell companies and consulting contracts that don't stand up to even basic scrutiny." He spread the documents across his desk. "Want to explain what Thornton Management Solutions does that's worth $8 million a year? Or why Chen Medical Consulting bills my company for services that my own staff provides?" "Those are legitimate," Tom started, but Maxwell talked over him. "And let's talk about the medications. 7 different doctors, none of them communicating with each other, all prescribing psychiatric drugs that could have dangerous interactions." He pulled out the prescription bottles Isabella had cataloged. "Did you know that taking these particular combinations could actually worsen depression? That they could cause the kind of emotional instability you've been documenting for your commitment papers?" Sarah's face had gone ashen. "Maxwell, we were trying to help." "Help me into a psychiatric facility so you could take control of my company," Maxwell finished. "Help me stay so isolated and medicated that I wouldn't notice you were robbing me blind." He leaned forward, and for the first time in 3 years he looked like the man who'd built an empire. "Did you know my children live 15 minutes away? Of course you did. You're the ones who told them to stay away, who convinced them I was too fragile for visits, too unstable for family contact." "They made that choice themselves," Tom snapped, his composure finally cracking. "After you pushed them away with your grief and your rage." "After you convinced them I wanted them gone," Maxwell corrected. "After you systematically isolated me from everyone who might have helped me see what you were doing." From the library, Maria watched the scene unfold with tense focus. This was the critical moment, the point where Tom and Sarah would either confess or double down. They chose the latter. "This is exactly what we were talking about," Marcus Webb said smoothly, pulling papers from his briefcase. "Paranoid delusions, conspiracy theories, aggression toward family members trying to help." He set the commitment papers on Maxwell's desk. "Mr. Thornton, these accusations are clear evidence that you need immediate psychiatric care. Dr. Chen and Dr. Thornton have both testified that I'm a danger to myself and others," Maxwell finished. "Based on evidence provided by staff who all mysteriously quit, staff you paid to document my violent episodes." He smiled grimly. "Except I have new staff now, staff who have been here for the past 2 days, documenting everything." Tom's eyes narrowed. "You mean those 4 identical women? Maxwell, hearing 4 people who look exactly alike is just more evidence of your instability." "Is it?" Maxwell touched his ear, and Maria knew he was signaling them. This was it, the moment they'd planned. Maria stepped out of the library, followed by Sophia. They walked into Maxwell's study, identical in their uniforms, identical in their expressions. Tom's mouth fell open. "Mr. Thornton," Maria said formally, "did you need something?" "Yes," Maxwell replied. "Please bring the video evidence we compiled." Maria left. 30 seconds later, Isabella entered from the opposite direction, carrying Gabriella's tablet. To anyone not looking closely, she was the same woman who just left. She set the tablet on Maxwell's desk and departed without a word. Tom was starting to look confused. Good. What is this? He started, but Maxwell held up a hand. Watch, he commanded, pressing play. On the screen, security footage from the past 2 days, edited into a devastating compilation. Maxwell throwing objects but never at people. Maxwell crying alone in his room. Maxwell taking medication and then vomiting it up hours later, clearly having adverse reactions. And throughout it all, timestamps showing that the violent episodes his family had documented were nothing more than grief and medication side effects, hardly grounds for commitment. But the real evidence came next. Audio recordings of Tom and Sarah on phone calls, discussing the commitment papers before Maxwell had even deteriorated to the point of needing them. Emails between Tom and Marcus Webb, planning the financial structure of the shell companies. Text messages between Sarah and Natalie, with Sarah actively discouraging the daughter from visiting her father with language carefully designed to make it seem like Maxwell's choice. How did you? Sarah whispered, her face pale. This is private communication, you can't. Can't what? Gabriella asked, stepping into the room from yet another entrance. To Tom and Sarah, she looked identical to the woman who'd brought the tablet and the woman who'd first appeared. Can't catch you in criminal fraud. Can't document your conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse and medical malpractice. Sophia reappeared from the first entrance, and now all 4 quadruplets stood in a line, identical faces, showing identical expressions of controlled fury. What the hell? Tom stammered. We're the Reyes quadruplets, Maria said calmly. Sisters, and over the past 48 hours, while you thought Mr. Thornton was still too broken to function, we documented everything. Maxwell stood, and for the first time in 3 years he stood tall. Here's what's going to happen. Marcus, you're going to take those commitment papers and burn them. Tom, you're going to return every penny you stole plus interest. And resign from the family trust. Sarah, you and every doctor you recruited to prescribe me medications are going to surrender your medical licenses, or I'm going to the state medical board with evidence of malpractice. You can't prove, Tom started. I can prove all of it, Maxwell interrupted. The quadruplets made sure of that, and if you think I'm bluffing, try me. I've spent 3 years punishing myself for failing Elizabeth. I've got a lot of rage stored up, and I'm happy to redirect it at the people who actually deserve it. The threat hung in the air like a blade. Marcus Webb, ever the pragmatist, was the first to break. I'll need time to review. You have 24 hours, Maxwell said flatly. After that, I file criminal charges and civil suits, and we see how this plays out in court and in the press. Billionaire's family steals millions while he grieves is a hell of a headline. Sarah was crying now, mascara tracking down her face in dark rivulets. Elizabeth would hate this, hate us fighting like this. Maxwell, please. Don't, Maxwell said, his voice breaking for the first time. Don't you dare invoke my wife. Elizabeth loved truth. She loved justice. And what you've done stealing from me, isolating me from our children, keeping me sick so you could profit, she would have destroyed you for it. Our children, Tom seized on the phrase. Maxwell, you pushed them away. You were so consumed by guilt. Guilt you encouraged, Maxwell roared, and the quadruplets saw the real rage finally break free. Not the performed anger of depression, but the righteous fury of a man who'd been systematically destroyed by people he trusted. Every email, every phone call, every prescription, they were designed to keep me drowning. To make sure I never surfaced long enough to ask questions or demand answers or reach out to Natalie and Thomas. He grabbed his phone, hands shaking with adrenaline and 3 years of suppressed emotion. Well, I'm asking now, I'm demanding now, and I'm reaching out now. He dialed before anyone could stop him. The phone rang twice, then a young woman's voice, uncertain and hopeful. Dad. Maxwell's face crumpled, tears streaming down his cheeks. Natalie, baby, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I know Tom said I needed space, but I didn't. I never wanted you to stay away. Oh my God, Natalie's voice cracked. Dad, I've wanted to call you every day for 3 years. Uncle Tom said you told him you couldn't handle seeing us, that it was too painful, that we reminded you too much of Mom. I never said that, Maxwell whispered. I never. Natalie, I love you, I miss you. Please, can you come see me? You and Tommy, today. The sob that came through the phone broke something in the room. Even Tom looked away, guilt finally showing on his face. I'm already getting my keys, Natalie said through her tears. I'll pick up Tommy from school. We'll be there in 30 minutes. Dad, I love you. I never stopped loving you. Maxwell couldn't speak, could only nod while tears poured down his face. Maria gently took the phone from his shaking hands. "Natalie," she said softly, "this is Maria Reyes. I work for your father, he'll be here when you arrive. And Natalie, bring tissues." She hung up and looked at Tom and Sarah, at Marcus Webb gathering his worthless papers, at the wreckage of a conspiracy that had held a family hostage for 3 years. "You need to leave," she said firmly, "before his children get here, before they see what you've done to their father." For a moment, Maria thought Tom might argue, might try to salvage the situation with more lies and manipulation. But Gabriella stepped forward, her tablet extended with one more screen of evidence. Bank records showing exactly where the $40 million had gone. Tom's house in the Hamptons. Sarah's medical practice expansion. Private school tuition for Tom's kids. Luxury cars and expensive vacations, and all the trappings of wealth built on the broken back of a grieving man. 24 hours, Maxwell repeated, his voice steadier now. "Or I destroy you the way you destroyed me." They left, Tom with his jaw tight, Sarah still crying, Marcus Webb already on his phone with damage control specialists. Mrs. Patterson, who'd been standing frozen in the doorway throughout the confrontation, started to follow. "Mrs. Patterson," Maxwell called. She turned, her face carefully blank. "You're fired. You have 1 hour to clear your things from the staff quarters." She opened her mouth as if to protest, then seemed to think better of it and simply nodded. When they were alone, just Maxwell and the 4 quadruplets who'd orchestrated his salvation, the silence felt heavy with aftermath. Maxwell sank into his chair, looking drained and overwhelmed and more human than he had in 3 years. "They're really coming," he said, almost to himself. "My children are really coming." "They are," Isabella confirmed gently. "And Mr. Thornton, you need to be ready for that conversation. They have 3 years of hurt and confusion and grief that they need to process. This won't be easy." "I know," Maxwell said. "I know I failed them. I know I can't get those years back." He looked at the quadruplets, these 4 strangers who'd saved him from his own family. "Why did you do this? Really? It can't just be because of your mother." Maria sat down across from him, her sisters flanking her in unconscious formation. "My mother died thinking she'd failed us, thinking her genetic legacy was a death sentence instead of the gift of life. It took her death to teach us that love isn't about being perfect or strong or always having the right answers. It's about showing up, being present, fighting through the pain to stay connected." "You weren't showing up," Sophia said bluntly. "Not for yourself, not for your children, and your family was making sure you never could." "So we removed the obstacles," Gabriella added. "The rest, rebuilding your relationship with Natalie and Thomas, healing from your grief, taking back your company, that's your work. We just gave you the chance to do it." "And the chance to be angry at the right people," Isabella finished. "Grief doesn't need rage to be valid, but betrayal deserves every ounce of fury you've been directing at yourself." Maxwell laughed shakily. "Elizabeth would have liked you 4. She always said the world needed more people who cared about truth more than comfort." He paused. "I don't even know your full names. You've saved my life, my company, my relationship with my children, and I don't know who you are." "Maria, Sophia, Isabella, and Gabriella Reyes," Maria said. "We're quadruplets, obviously, sisters. We started a private investigation firm 3 years ago, specializing in cases where the system fails vulnerable people. Rich, poor, doesn't matter. If someone's being abused or exploited and the authorities won't help, we do." "So this is your job?" Maxwell asked. "Going undercover as maids?" "Whatever works," Sophia shrugged. "We've been nurses, secretaries, baristas, dog walkers. People don't see service workers. They definitely don't see 4 identical service workers as a coordinated investigative team." "Your employment agency is ours," Gabriella confirmed. "Elite Staffing Solutions. It's how we get into places where bad things are happening behind closed doors." Maxwell shook his head in wonder. "And you just decided to help me, a billionaire you didn't know?" "We were hired," Maria admitted. "Anonymous tip, prepaid for 2 weeks of investigation. Someone knew what was happening to you and wanted it stopped." "Who?" Maxwell demanded. Before they could answer, the elevator chimed. The penthouse door opened, and a young woman burst in mid-20s, in scrubs from her shift, with Elizabeth Chen's eyes and Maxwell Thornton's stubborn chin. Behind her came a young man, early 20s, law textbooks still clutched in his arms, looking so much like a younger version of Maxwell that it was almost painful. "Dad," Natalie breathed, stopping in the doorway of the study. Maxwell stood, and for a moment everyone froze. A tableau of family separated by 3 years of grief and manipulation, with 4 identical strangers as witnesses to the reunion. Then Natalie ran to him, and Thomas followed, and Maxwell Thornton, billionaire, tyrant, broken man, fell to his knees and held his children while they all cried together for the mother they'd lost and the years they'd wasted and the family they were finally reclaiming. The quadruplets slipped out quietly, giving them privacy. In the kitchen, they gathered around Gabriella's tablet one more time. "So," Isabella said quietly, "who really hired us?" Sophia pulled up an email, the anonymous tip that had started everything. The sender had used sophisticated encryption, but Sophia had been patient, and she'd finally cracked it. The sender's email address resolved to a medical account at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, and the signature, buried in the metadata, made them all smile. Dr. Natalie Thornton. Maxwell's daughter had saved him. She'd known something was wrong, had suspected her uncle's motives, but had been too young and too isolated to fight the family alone. So she'd hired the Reyes Quadruplets, trusting that professionals could do what she couldn't, expose the truth and give her father a chance to heal. "She's 24 years old," Maria said softly. "Lost her mother, lost her father to grief, spent 3 years being told she couldn't help, and she hired us anyway." "Elizabeth's daughter," Sophia agreed. "Justice runs in the family." From the study they could hear voices, Maxwell telling his children everything, Natalie and Thomas asking questions, all of them crying and laughing and beginning the long process of healing. It would take time, therapy, hard conversations and harder forgiveness, but they were together now and that was what mattered. The quadruplets left before the family noticed them gone, slipping out of the penthouse that had been a prison and was now, finally, beginning to feel like a home again. They had other cases waiting, other vulnerable people who needed the system of silence broken, other families torn apart by greed and betrayal and lies. But tonight they'd celebrate, because tonight they'd done what their mother had taught them. They'd shown up for someone who needed them, even when it was hard, even when it was complicated, even when it meant facing down powerful people who wanted to keep their victim broken. And in the end, that was what mattered most. 3 months later, the New York Times ran a headline that shook the business world. "Thornton returns. Billionaire retakes control, exposes family fraud scheme." Maria read it over her morning coffee in the quadruplets' Brooklyn apartment, smiling at the photograph accompanying the article. Maxwell Thornton stood on the steps of Thornton Industries headquarters, flanked by his children, Natalie in her hospital scrubs having come straight from a shift, Thomas in a suit that made him look older than his 22 years. They were all smiling, and Maxwell's eyes were clear in a way they hadn't been for 3 years. "Says here he's implementing a complete restructuring," Sophia called from the kitchen, reading from her tablet. "New ethics oversight, independent board review, and mandatory mental health support for all executives and family members involved in company leadership." "And the criminal charges?" Isabella asked, walking in from her morning run. "Tom took a plea deal," Gabriella reported, her own laptop open to the legal filings. 5 years probation, full restitution of the $40 million plus another $20 million in penalties, and permanent ban from serving in any corporate leadership position. Sarah Chen surrendered her medical license rather than face malpractice charges. The other doctors who prescribed without coordination are under review by the state medical board. "And Marcus Webb?" Maria asked. "Disbarred," Sophia said with satisfaction. "Turns out this wasn't his first rodeo with elder abuse cases. The New York State Bar Association took a very dim view of his involvement." The apartment's doorbell rang, unusual for 8 a.m. on a Saturday. Maria checked the security camera and felt her eyebrows rise. Well, this should be interesting. She opened the door to find Maxwell Thornton standing in her hallway, looking healthier than she'd ever seen him. He'd gained weight, good weight, the kind that came from regular meals and reduced stress. His hair was cut properly, his clothes fit, and most importantly, his eyes were calm. Not happy exactly, grief didn't work on that kind of timeline, but peaceful. "Mr. Thornton," Maria said, surprised. "We weren't expecting." "I know," Maxwell interrupted. "I should have called, but I wanted to deliver this in person." He held out an envelope, expensive paper, with the Thornton Industries letterhead. Maria took it carefully, feeling the weight of something more than paper inside. "What is this?" "Open it," Maxwell said simply. Inside, a check for $10 million made out to Reyes Quadruplet Investigations LLC. Beneath it, a letter on formal letterhead. "Dear Maria, Sophia, Isabella, and Gabriella. No amount of money can repay what you did for me and my family. You gave me back my children, my company, my life. You exposed a conspiracy that had stolen 3 years from me, 3 years I can never get back, but that I can honor by living better, doing better, being the father and businessman I should have been all along. This payment is not a gift. It's a retainer. I want to fund your work, not just this case, but all your cases. Every vulnerable person you help, every system of abuse you expose, every family you save from the kind of isolation and exploitation I endured. There are too many people like me, people who have lost their way, who have been betrayed by those they trusted, who have been systematically kept from help and healing. You four have a gift for seeing through the facades, for recognizing when someone's being destroyed from the inside out. Use this money to expand your operations, hire more investigators, take on bigger cases. Make it your mission to be the help that arrives when the system fails. With deepest gratitude, Maxwell Thornton III. P.S. Natalie says thank you for hearing yourself on her behalf. She's covering your firm's next 5 cases, whatever they are. Apparently justice runs in our family now. Maria looked up to find her sisters reading over her shoulder, their identical faces showing identical expressions of shock. This is, Sophia started. Insane, Isabella finished. Generous, Gabriella corrected, and strategic. With this kind of funding we could change everything, Maria breathed. Maxwell smiled, the expression transforming his face into something almost unrecognizable from the man who'd thrown coffee cups 3 months ago. I've started a foundation, the Elizabeth Chen Thornton Foundation for Family Advocacy. It funds programs for grief support, mental health services, and financial literacy to prevent elder abuse. But I wanted you four to have this separately. Because what you do, going into the places where the system fails, being the truth tellers when everyone else is complicit in the lies, that's something special. We don't know what to say, Maria admitted. Say you'll keep doing it, Maxwell replied. Say you'll keep being the people who show up for strangers, who refuse to walk away when things get complicated, who care more about truth than comfort. That, Sophia said firmly, we can promise. Maxwell nodded, satisfied. Then his expression shifted, becoming more hesitant. There's something else. Natalie and Thomas, they want to meet you. Properly, I mean. Not as my employees, but as the people who saved our family. We'd like that, Isabella said warmly. Tomorrow, dinner at my place, Maxwell asked, then caught himself. Sorry, I'm still working on asking instead of demanding. Would you like to come to dinner tomorrow? Natalie's cooking. She makes this incredible paella that Elizabeth taught her, and Thomas has been taking a wine appreciation class, and I promise I won't throw anything. They all laughed at that, the tension breaking. We'll be there, Maria promised. After Maxwell left, the quadruplets sat around their kitchen table. The check and letter spread before them like a roadmap to a future they'd barely dared to imagine. $10 million, Gabriella said, her analytical mind already running calculations. We could open satellite offices, hire specialists, invest in better technology. We could take on cases we've had to turn down, Sophia added. The ones that need months of investigation instead of weeks. The ones where the abuse is so well hidden that it takes serious resources to expose. We could actually make a difference, Isabella said softly. Not just for individuals, but systemically. We could change how these cases are handled. Maria looked at her sisters, these 3 women who'd shared everything with her since before birth, who turned their shared trauma into a mission to help others, who'd refused to let one angry billionaire stay trapped in his grief because they knew what it felt like to drown. Mom would be proud, she said quietly. They sat in silence for a moment, remembering the woman who taught them that love meant showing up, that family meant fighting through the hard parts, that justice was worth pursuing even when it was complicated. So we do it, Sophia said. We take Maxwell's offer, we expand the firm, we help more people. We become the intervention that arrives when everything else has failed, Gabriella agreed. We be the people who refuse to let the vulnerable stay isolated, Isabella added. We show up, Maria finished. No matter what. They stacked their hands in the center of the table, the way they had as children making promises, as teenagers facing their mother's death, as adults starting a business built on their shared conviction that the world needed people who cared more about truth than comfort. To showing up, Maria said. To refusing to run, Sophia added. To being the impossible help, Gabriella continued. To saving the people everyone else has given up on, Isabella concluded. To us, they said together, and sealed the promise with hands that had held each other through everything, and would hold through whatever came next. 6 months later. The Thornton Foundation Gala was the kind of event that Manhattan's elite attended to be seen. Crystal chandeliers, designer gowns, champagne that cost more than most people's monthly rent. But tonight, the The cause actually mattered. Maxwell stood at the podium, looking every inch the successful billionaire he'd once been, but with something new in his eyes: humility. 3 years ago, he began, his voice carrying across the ballroom, I lost my wife to a tragic accident. I blamed myself. I isolated myself. I let grief and guilt consume me to the point where I became a danger to myself and everyone around me. The room was silent, hanging on his words. What I didn't know, what I couldn't see, was that people I trusted were exploiting my grief for their own gain. They were keeping me sick, keeping me isolated, because it served their purposes. He paused. I would still be trapped in that cycle if not for 4 women who saw through the system that had been built around me. 4 women who refused to accept that isolation was inevitable, that I was beyond help, that my family was beyond saving. He gestured to a table near the front, where the Reyes quadruplets sat in identical evening gowns, a gift from Natalie, who'd insisted they should actually look the part for once. They shifted uncomfortably under the attention, never entirely comfortable with being the center of focus. Maria, Sophia, Isabella and Gabriella, Reyes run a private investigation firm that specializes in cases where the system fails vulnerable people, Maxwell continued. In the past 6 months, with the support of the Elizabeth Chen Thornton Foundation, they've helped expose 12 elder abuse cases, prevented 4 fraudulent commitment proceedings, and reunited 17 families that had been deliberately separated by manipulative relatives. The applause was thunderous, but Maxwell held up his hand. But I didn't ask them here tonight just to thank them publicly, though they deserve that and more. I asked them here because I want to challenge every person in this room. He looked around at the assembled wealth and power. How many of you know someone who's isolated? How many have watched a friend or colleague or family member sink into depression or addiction or rage and told yourselves it wasn't your business? How many have looked away because getting involved would be complicated or uncomfortable or difficult? The silence now was uncomfortable, people shifting in their seats. I'm not judging, Maxwell said quietly, because I was that person too. Before Elizabeth died, I knew colleagues who were struggling. I knew friends whose marriages were falling apart. I knew it wasn't my business, so I looked away. His voice broke slightly. And when I needed help, people looked away from me, because I'd set the precedent that looking away was acceptable. He straightened. The Elizabeth Chen Thornton Foundation is dedicated to changing that culture, to creating systems where checking on each other isn't intrusive, it's expected, where asking, "Are you okay?" and actually waiting for the honest answer is normal, where intervention isn't something to be avoided but something to be celebrated. Maxwell looked directly at the quadruplets. These 4 women taught me that showing up for someone isn't about having all the answers. It's about refusing to accept that they're alone. It's about seeing through the performance to the pain underneath. It's about caring more about truth than comfort. He raised his glass. To the Reyes quadruplets, to everyone who refuses to look away, and to building a world where no one has to face their darkest moments alone, because we've all decided that looking away is no longer acceptable. The ballroom erupted in applause and the clink of glasses. At their table, surrounded by Natalie and Thomas and the foundation board members who'd become unlikely friends, the quadruplets looked at each other with tears in their eyes. We saved one angry billionaire, Sophia murmured, and he's trying to save the world. No, Maria corrected, watching Maxwell laugh with his children, watching the foundation staff circulate with information about programs and services, watching a room full of powerful people actually engage with the idea that they had a responsibility to each other. We all are, one intervention at a time. Later that night, after the gala had ended and the quadruplets returned to their now expanded Brooklyn office, they found an email waiting. Another anonymous tip. Another person trapped in a system designed to keep them isolated and suffering. Another chance to be the help that arrives when everything else has failed. Maria looked at her sisters, ready. Always, they replied in unison. Because that's what they did. They showed up. They refused to run. They were the impossible help, the unexpected truth, the intervention that changed everything. And in a world that often looked away, that made all the difference. What would you have done if you'd been the Reyes quadruplets? If you'd walked into that penthouse and seen a man drowning in his own grief while his family profited from his pain? Would you have just done your job and looked away, like 17 other employees before you? Or would you have had the courage to expose the truth, even when it was complicated, even when it was risky, even when it meant going against powerful people who wanted to keep their victim broken? This story reminds us that the people who seem the most untouchable, the wealthy, the powerful, the ones who have everything money can buy, can be the most vulnerable to betrayal by those they trust. Maxwell Thornton had billions, But he didn't have the one thing that mattered: people who cared more about his well-being than their own profit. But it also reminds us that justice can prevail when someone has the courage to stand up and say, "This isn't right." When someone refuses to be complicit in the system of silence. When someone shows up for a stranger because it's the right thing to do, not because it's easy or comfortable or financially beneficial. If this story made your blood boil at the betrayal, if it restored your faith that good people still exist in this world, if it made you think about who in your life might be drowning while everyone looks away, then I need you to do something for me. Smash that like button if you believe people like the Reyes Quadruplets are heroes we need more of in this world. Drop a comment below saying "Justice served" if you think Maxwell's family got exactly what they deserved, and tell me, would you have had the courage to expose them? Subscribe and hit that notification bell because I bring you real stories like this every single week. Stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Stories about justice prevailing against all odds. Stories that remind us that standing up for what's right is always worth it, even when it's hard. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's isolated. Someone who's being betrayed by people they trust. Someone who's given up hope that anyone will care enough to help. Because maybe, just maybe, this story will give them the courage to reach out or give someone else the courage to refuse to look away. We're building a community here of people who believe that truth matters more than comfort, that justice is worth fighting for, and that showing up for each other isn't optional, it's essential. Hit that subscribe button and join us. Because together, we're going to shine a light on every dark corner where people are suffering in silence while others profit from their pain. Comment "I won't look away" if you're ready to be someone who shows up when it matters. The Reyes Quadruplets changed Maxwell Thornton's life by refusing to accept that his isolation was inevitable. Who will you refuse to give up on? Like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, don't look away. Because the next person who needs saving could be someone you know, and the person who saves them, that could be you.